And so it's like, here you have a guy that comes from the world of technology using the traditional tools, and to him it was like this giant play sandbox, a whole new thing to try. Very different. John Williams is like, synthesizers are like this ugly duckling that I have to kind of somehow fit into my beautifully conceived orchestra. I didn't see it for the potential, but someone coming from the other direction saw it as like, oh, this is my brushes are like 1,000 times bigger now. Like I have 1,000 more options.
Yeah, but given a pencil and a book and see what he does with it.
Hi, I'm Austin Wintory.
And I'm Angela Bermudez.
Angela. So this is Brushes and Keys, and it's a new podcast that we're doing. Some people listening might be familiar with our collaborations from Dialogos and just from the things that we share on social media. But this is a new venture because basically when we're not recording for the last several years, there's been 1,000 instances where we started a conversation and just would be like, this could be an interesting show.
Every time I talk to you, Austin, you're it's not because it's you, but I get so excited because you have so many stories to tell, and I end up saying we should record this. This is I want the world to listen to this. So
that's what we're doing.
After I don't know 3 years, here we are.
Yep, exactly. Basically, each episode we try to just tackle one subject that is interesting to us and kind of attack it from the angles of how you see it as a visual artist and painter and all these other things that you do under that general label. And obviously, as a musician, composer, blah, blah, blah. And just kind of where those two perspectives converge on some topic. And so this is the first of hopefully thousands.
Hopefully.
So yeah, and what I love is that as soon as we started talking about it, it was like almost immediately there's 30 ideas for subjects of just because everyday life constantly presents opportunities.
Absolutely.
But what we've chosen for our first is actually I like that we did because I feel like it's a thing that comes up a lot. And I also see it a lot in just with composers, like when I interact with young composers who are just getting started. The question of the extent to which an artist is defined by the medium they're working in. And particularly, we have our first Canvas cameo, of which I'm sure there will be many.
I was hoping. Oh my God. I took her out before and I tried to just play with her earlier just so she doesn't interrupt us. But yeah, I guess.
Now it's good to get that early in the recording so that it's a known part of the, it's a known part of the like cast of characters of this.
Yeah, brushes and keys and squeakies.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so the in the world of composers, especially in the classical composer world, there's this long-running kind of tension that's, I think, finally dying off. But when I was in school, there was this tension of composers that write music using the computer versus those that are like real composers that write by hand with pencil and paper. And there was always this sense that you're not legitimate as a composer, at least not in the classical tradition. Like if you're writing for orchestra or string quartet or whatever, if you don't write by hand, you're somehow not the real deal, because that's how Beethoven did it. As if that means anything, which I guess shows how I feel about this question already. But the idea that if you don't write by hand, you're not the real deal.
Yeah, what is the difference? Why does the computer makes it less genuine?
Because the most obvious there's a lot of answers to that, but I think the one that is the reason why there's that prejudice is because you can write music without knowing how to read sheet music as a result. I can just sit at my computer and play things on my computer, like my digital piano, and the computer records what I'm playing, and I could write an entire symphony this way without knowing how to read the sheet music of my own piece. It would be like, imagine I have a voice app voice memo thing on my phone, and I write a whole novel by speaking into my phone, but I actually don't know how to read words. It's like, does that invalidate the quality of my novel if I have to speak it and rely on someone else to actually listen to the words and write it down?
I didn't realize. I just pictured the computer like a program or whatever with the 5 lines, and then just But I didn't realize that you just can't basically write music without even knowing the basics.
Yeah, I mean, they're like very famous Hollywood composers, like Hans Zimmer supposedly is not that fluent in the ability to read sheet music. Like I don't think he completely lacks the ability, but it's never been how he writes music. To him, music is sound and technology. Also, there's a whole other genre of music. Like, remember the game Inside? The composer of that, Martin Stieg Andersen, he is classically trained, but all that score and all of the music that he writes is he'll just like take a microphone, record a sound, manipulate that sound, add another sound. Like that's nothing like writing for violins and trombones. And so it's like, what would you even notate? There's nothing there is, right. It's not like he's telling the like, if he's recording the sound of, dropping a rock into a bucket of water, like, what do you write down? Like mezzo forte rock in what? Like, it's a silly, the whole concept doesn't even make sense.
Yes.
So, but that's what I mean, where it's like, it feels by virtue of saying no.
I see. Without that explanation, if you ask me if it's more valuable the way we know music, like writing, like Beethoven, versus some keyboard connected to a computer, I will think, yes, that's cheating. But after this little explanation, I think that is pretty much legit as well.
Well, I mean,
but also,
another one of the...
also because I know Paul McCartney is not...
That was exactly what I was just about to say. I was going to say, he famously can't read music either. And has never had a reason to. Exactly. There's never been... like, the argument I always make is, I don't see a reason to not learn more skills. Like, it just makes you more skilled. So what is the possible downside to that?
It's not that your artistry lacks of creativity or whatever, but it's just basically the tools that you're using.
But if you're a genius like Paul McCartney and you can't read music, then it's obvious that learning music won't make him like an even better version of Paul McCartney necessarily, because it's clear that he's making music outside of that way of thinking entirely. The reason why this was exciting to me for this, like for Brushes and Keys, was the idea that it never occurred to me until you came into my life that other art forms would have parallels to this. And so
right.
when we read a tweet or whatever once upon a time that made a comment like, real artists use oil.
That's one of my favorites.
Yeah. We don't need to go into the gritty details of that story, but we saw a comment online that said something to the effect of, a real artist doesn't use anything. A real painter, I should say.
Yes.
Only uses oil.
It was a comment shitting on acrylic painting, basically. But yeah, I believe, yes, oil painting has a very historic background and all that, but there's no point on shitting on other mediums just because this other has whatever is more expensive, or it's not about the medium at the end, it's about the final piece. So
it struck me as analogous also to the pen and paper composer versus the computer keyboard composer, in that you have to write more slowly by hand. That's just like a truth. You cannot write as fast as when you can play it in with your fingers in basically real time. To sit there and write all this material adds a like physical labor to the process. And it seemed like oil kind of has a similar effect. Like, you can't
Oh
make
yes, absolutely.
I never knew until
it's just not, you can't compare the textures and the techniques, the brushes and the movement of your hand versus the pen and tablet.
Well, I haven't even gotten to that because I wanted to ask you about that also, because even between acrylic and oil, you can use all the same types of brushes, and but it's still, the acrylic reacts. Oh, I assume there's not like brushes you would never use with oil or something, right?
There are no rules for art. Mixed media, for example, they can do whatever. Anybody can do whatever they want. If they want to mix oil with acrylic, there's a way to do that. There's no point in holding back if you just want to experiment. At the end, it's just the experience.
Yeah, exactly. And so because the tools are like shared, the fundamental difference is more how the paint itself is reacting and like how fast it dries. I never realized how slow oil dries until I met you.
Yeah. Yeah,
but it's crazy, right? I mean, isn't it like hours and hours?
It's so worth it though, because yeah, it's my favorite. I guess my favorite traditional today. I'm not gonna say forever, but yes, today is my favorite. Right. I love acrylics because that one dries in 10 minutes, and then you can apply another layer easily. But the textures and the final pieces are definitely different from oil paintings.
But I think that's that gets to the heart of what this whole question of the idea of asking just how much the medium defines the art, because I think the fact that acrylic dries so fast, you will paint differently, knowing that you can iterate and change and cover it, and and it's like you're running versus you're walking.
Exactly.
And that's just gonna change things. That's just gonna alter the process. And yes. I would think that that's going to come with positives, and also if you want to like there would be a reason. I don't know, you tell me. There would be a reason why it's better to go slower, not just because the oil demands it, but like certain pieces are better if you take your time and you go slower.
Yes, I guess also depends of like if you're inspired by some, I don't know, deep anger, or you want to do something that expose that you want to explain through your work. A lot of artists, they just go for, black and white paint and then just smear all over canvas and, just go crazy. And some pieces, take weeks. Some pieces take an hour. It's just, I guess there's no, depending of the artist, depending of the feelings, depending of so many things.
That's actually a really interesting point. I remember Leonard Bernstein once said that he felt that the greatest composers, even knowing that sometimes it took years to write a symphony, for example, like Brahms spent almost 20 years writing his first symphony. He was so intimidated by Beethoven that he kept procrastinating, essentially, because he thought Beethoven perfected the art form. What do I have to say? This is pointless.
It's so funny. Sorry for interrupting, but this just like immediately came to mind the piece that I was making at Abbey Road. I think I feel that same overwhelm.
Yeah, and it's still.
I started painting something and I never finished it.
I know.
It happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it happens because a thing's not ready, and other times it happens because, like, sometimes we're just get on our own head and we just have to get over it. But then other times the piece is sort of talking to you slowly. I think in Brahms' case, it was a little bit more the first one. He just kind of had to get over it. Because once he finished the first, he wrote 3 more pretty fast.
Oh, yeah.
In any case, I remember Bernstein made this comment about how the greatest works feel as though they were written in a flurry of inspiration and passion and excitement. Like the composer, his hand is just moving so fast that it practically came out in real time. Even though in reality, we know that's not possible, especially with big orchestra pieces. Like it takes days or weeks or months or years. And yet the best ones don't feel like you don't feel that it took years, because think how boring that would likely be if it feels like, oh my God, they wrote that note and then 60 seconds later was another note, but they actually wrote that note a year later. Like if it gave you that impression, I just can't imagine the piece wouldn't feel just insanely boring and tedious. And I feel like that's actually an interesting analog to oil, where the best oil painting, best is probably not the right word to use here, but many great paintings feel as if the artist was just like rushing this thing onto the canvas, but then in reality, it took them, maybe weeks. I mean, this is how I feel about your piece with the for the Light in the Void poster.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like something that was done in like a slow, boring way. It's like a burst of energy and
that one was a burst of energy out of lack of time.
Yeah, but still, it was days and days and days of painting.
Yes, absolutely.
And so I think it's interesting. How do you preserve that feeling? I mean, I know in that case it was the deadline. But how do you, because I struggle with this sometimes. I mean, I think all composers have this problem of, if a piece takes 2 weeks to write but only takes 3 minutes to listen to. I'm just curious how you maintain that feeling of spontaneousness, because I get it. I've seen you do it with acrylics during Dialogos, where you'll have a whole painting, and then the way we go, the painting, you'll have a whole new idea, and in a matter of seconds the painting has wildly changed. Like, you just throw a ton of red over all this blue or something. Yeah. And then if
you're asking me what is driving that feeling of changing, is you.
I get in Dialogos while we're that's very sweet. I get that during Dialogos, but I'm saying with an oil painting or something that takes more time, is there, I feel like I know the answer to this, but I'm just curious if you'll say something different. How to make an oil painting feel like it has that same spontaneous energy that you're able to create with the acrylics, or do you not even try?
I don't.
You get what I'm saying? Like,
I don't try. I just focus on the piece, and there's no general recipe to create.
Do you think that the oil paintings have a more kind of meditative quality as a general?
No. No. The answer is no, because I can find meditation with any medium. The process, not the tools I'm using, because I can perfectly grab a big piece of stone and start carving and use all my strength and sweat and get all nasty and hit hard, and then bring up like a very soft, gentle figure, and you can't imagine that came from this hard work or anger or whatever, like whatever I needed to carve that piece of stone. So I don't think there is a tag for mediums, as if I use oil paint, I am literally a very quiet oil painter, artist, or versus if I'm a comic artist, that means that I'm a loud person, and I'm a very I'm being very vague, but
no, I mean, and clearly there's no sort of rule. It's just I'm always interested in this question of the extent to which the tools that we use or the medium that we're working in, to the extent that they might help define our work or influence how we see things. Like, okay, here's a question that's related. I can imagine a world in which somebody gets started as an artist having never painted with traditional, acrylics or oils or anything, watercolors, any of that kind of stuff. Someone handed them an iPad and they started messing around. And you discover all the things that are unique to that, like the different types of brushes or the ability to zoom in and zoom out, and all these things that you can't do. Mm-hmm. And then it makes me wonder, what if someone did that for 10 years and then you put a canvas in front of them? Would it be crippling?
Yes. Oh, for sure. Like, see it this way. if you learn to drive a car in a Tesla, what is gonna be after, I don't know, 10 years of driving that car if you change to a manual, like
Right.
a very old-fashioned manual?
I mean, in most cases,
you're fucking gonna crash at some point.
it's not even you wouldn't even crash because you wouldn't even be able to move. I think
I don't know that, but
I mean, driving. I think that it's actually a really interesting analogy because I think you wouldn't even know how to start. Most people, specifically in the case of a manual, like the operation of the clutch is so
Right.
alien to somebody who has driven an automatic car or an electric car that you're like, I don't even know how to turn this on, basically.
Yes.
And I could see that. But it also makes me wonder, this is me being like the naive idealist, but it also makes me wonder if it could make a super interesting, innovative artist because they're trying to like recreate digital techniques on canvas, and it leads them to do a bunch of weird stuff that a traditional painter who never touched an iPad would even think to try. And I don't know what that, I'm speaking abstractly because I don't know what that would be.
Yes. There's probably people that experimented. I mean, at this point, there's obviously the new generations, they grew up playing with their phone, and there's so many apps that they can use, and iPads, and so I don't think there's a kid in this world that haven't tried to draw on their phone.
Which seems like a good thing. I mean, it seems like...
It is a good thing. But yeah, if we have both traditional and digital, and traditional artists that move to digital, I think that's great. They're not gonna have any problem. Of course, learning the programs and that's a little confusing, but they're gonna get it. But if we do the opposite, the other direction, that's probably gonna be a little harder for them to learn, just because there's so much to learn. There is. I don't know. It's like the manual, It's like you can't do what you do on your iPad. You can't Control C. You can't zoom in
Right.
and out.
I want to make a point about what you were just saying, because as you're talking, it made me realize that I think that it's the opposite with music. If somebody is super deep down the world of digital painting, they would struggle to feel like it's like they have all these tools they don't get to use anymore if they pick up paintbrush and sit at a canvas, and that it would actually be very intimidating, whereas somebody who's painting traditionally might discover all these cool things that build for them on digital. I think it's the exact opposite with music. As I sit here thinking historically, at least in Hollywood terms, all the like super old school composers like John Williams and Elmer Bernstein, and every time, not true for all of them, Jerry Goldsmith is an exception, there's a few others, Ennio Morricone was an exception, but a lot of them, when they tried to use super like forward thinking electronics and stuff, it was always awkward because they tried writing for, like, every time John Williams uses synthesizers, it's pretty cheesy because he's writing for the synthesizer as if it's the same as the trumpet or something, or the violin or whatever, and he's using it just kind of as a member of the orchestra and not really seeing the full potential of what it can offer. And so it always feels like it doesn't really belong, it doesn't really fit in the mix. So like the traditional person using more modern technology doesn't, there's a lot of instances of it not quite working, whereas Hans Zimmer is a guy that was he played in bands, and he did like music for commercials and stuff in the UK. He grew up he was born in Germany and went to the UK, and he was doing this kind of work, and he was producing bands. Famously, he produced for the Buggles video Killed the Radio Star, and because when you record bands, it's often like, okay, let's record the drums, now let's try adding in the bass, and let's do that, and you build the recording. And then when Hans Zimmer had the opportunity to start using orchestra and be more traditional, he was like, what if we record the orchestra the same way I record the band? And so he starts like, okay, we can add all these, not just record the strings one day and then the brass another day, but like why not have a million brass players that you couldn't even fit them all in the room with the strings. They would overpower them, but they're recorded on their own. We can turn them up, we can turn them down, and we can create something that's not physically possible. Well, that's thinking like a record producer. And he was the first one to really start doing that. And he started recording orchestras the way we record bands. And so it's like, here you have a guy that comes from the world of technology using the traditional tools. And to him, it was like this giant play sandbox, a whole new thing to try. Very different. John Williams is like, synthesizers are like this ugly duckling that I have to kind of somehow fit into my beautifully conceived orchestra. I didn't see it for the potential, but someone coming from the other direction saw it as like, oh, this is my brushes are like 1,000 times bigger now. Like I have 1,000 more options.
Yeah, but given a pencil and a book and see what he does.
Oh yeah, he couldn't. Absolutely. No, like he absolutely couldn't. But he also, the technology made it so he didn't need to. So anyway, just to me, it seemed like an interesting.
That's very interesting. Yes.
And case in point, one of the ideas for this podcast that you suggested that I really liked was that in addition to just having a question that we kind of kick around and talk about, we would have some sort of like recurring like features to just kind of give us some structure, I guess, which I benefit from. And
yes,
one of which was the idea of periodically just talking about a sort of almost like album of the day, and in suggesting OK Computer of Radiohead, it's actually a perfect tie into all this discussion.
I actually was asking on Twitter, like, which is your favorite album of ever? And many people name that one. I know you have it over there somewhere.
So, yeah, it's one of the few vinyls.
You're very familiar with it, yes.
Yeah, I'm not a big vinyl collector, but I do have that one.
But also because I think it fits very well with this topic in particular, because we're supposed to talk about the album, myself about the artwork, and Austin, of course, the music and whatever he wanted to talk about. And I think that is a perfect example of digital versus traditional, because I was actually just checking what's like the background of this, like art and the artist Stanley Dunwood. He actually mentioned something that was like, it's so great, because he wanted to use, on this one in particular, he used a computer. He's very traditional. He uses acrylics, he uses oils and pen and pencil, and but for this one he basically did this weird, like a street and montage with different images that what's the word, like
overlap and kind of coalesce.
Overlap, And the reason that you see those images collapsing is because he said...
Yeah, I just pulled it up to look at it again.
He didn't want to... He was working on a computer, and you can do a lot of things with the computer. You can undo things, but he didn't. He basically, all of those overlapped images, he basically, every time he did a mistake, he just put another thing on top of it.
Interesting. It was... like 25 years ago. I also imagine there were certain limitations on what creating in the computer could even do.
Yes, absolutely. So I just thought that was so beautiful, because he said, why will you just undo things if you can't in real life?
That makes me that gives me a flashback to John Cage, the most sort of famous avant-garde composer of all time, who really took music from the world of modern to postmodern, and the idea of, these are the rules and this is how to write a piece correctly and blah, 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 all this stuff that classical music had been doing for hundreds of years. And he's the guy that helped push us into this modern world of there are no rules. Anything you want to do, you do you kind of thing. And there was a story I remember reading where he lived in Manhattan in an apartment, and it was not soundproof. There's no such thing as soundproofing in Manhattan. And so you can hear all the street traffic and stuff. And somebody said, how do you work as a composer with all this noise everywhere? And he goes, I basically am being given free music every day, all day long. Why would I possibly want to turn that off? Like to me, it feels connected to what you just said about the artist in the album cover of the idea of like, why would I create something that is sterile and kind of pushes out the real world and eliminates the imperfections that are sort of natural and sort of in a way supposed to be there.
Yes,
I had no
exactly.
idea that I never even knew the name of that artist that you're talking about. I pulled it up to look for a high resolution image just now.
You have the album there. Go.
No, but I'm like tied into the computer. But actually, I'm glad I Googled it because the article that came up with a high resolution image of it says that fans apparently those streets is like a real location, and fans at some point, like 20 years after the album came out, figured out where that is, which apparently is in Hartford, Connecticut. Which is really
Amazing.
Funny. But
Hardcore fans.
yeah, no kidding.
They never fail.
Have you ever done that? Anything similar to the way he's describing that process?
Like never undo things?
Yeah, like or anything that just feels similar.
I have tried, but I never finished anything nor published anything. But I have I had some ideas of just, go crazy with a paintbrush, and then from that point, create something. But don't mess with the brush itself. You can change little things and see what comes from it. So I want to do that at some point. I have tried, but I haven't feel very, comfortable yet. But I think that is a fun idea. Just, let the mess just see through that and take what comes from there.
It makes me I realized as soon as I asked the question you started talking, I also realized in a way Dialogos is that where everything happens over that 30 minutes and there is no, like, the painting that comes out of it is the painting that comes out
Yes.
of it.
Oh yes, I always hate them.
Aw, come on. There's so many good ones. It's the same, but it's the same with the music. Like, there've been times where I went back and I listened to what I was playing, and I was like, oh my god, it's such an amateur. But it's fun. A shout out to a composer friend of mine, Paul Leonard Morgan, who worked on like Cyberpunk with CD Projekt Red and a bunch of movies and stuff. He was telling me that he did a documentary about this artist who does she owns like the largest Polaroid camera in the world. Like it makes these giant, like they're like the size of your Light in the Void canvas, like huge prints. And so she basically will photograph somebody and take two photos, one that she keeps and one that they are essentially commissioning. So she gets two shots to take a photo of somebody, and that's it. And it's very ephemeral. You cannot manipulate and be all careful with it. And she also said they're going to stop making film for this thing. Like, my art form will die probably soon. And so they made a documentary about her. Apparently it sounded very kind of touching and poignant about the idea of like mortality, and also just how you have to just kind of let go of control. And so to write the score for this documentary, he did everything the same way. He would say, okay, I want to have piano in this scene. So he'd hit record and play it, and then rule was I can't change.
That is
so
awesome and very ballsy.
Absolutely, yeah. And he would have like a violinist come in, and they could do one take, that sort of thing. And but I thought that was a beautiful. I was like, oh, that seems like something I would do. Like it was
yeah, it sounds very much like.
Yeah, it was an awesome idea.
Yeah, you have the same level of craziness, I guess.
Yeah, I want to go watch that documentary, but anyway.
That sounds very interesting.
In terms of the music, I don't know that I even have that much to say that offers any kind of insight other than the part of what made me so happy about the album, the discussion of this album First off, it's an incredible album, and it's one of those that I had to remind myself that's from the 90s because it was so ahead of its time. You listen to it now and it's pretty fresh. And you think, Jesus, it was 25 years ago.
Absolutely.
It doesn't feel dated at all. Both musically, just as songs, but also how it's produced. And that's the thing that really, I think, is connected to what else we were talking about, because Johnny Greenwood and Tom York both have really, in the last few years, been scoring a lot of movies. And it blows my mind to hear how differently they are from each other, and also how different their musical sensibility is from the core sound of what you think of as Radiohead. And the perfect example of this idea of what happens when you have like the modern, sort of technology-oriented, hip, young person who then wants to be traditional, go listen to the score that he did for this movie, The Phantom Thread, for Paul Thomas Anderson. And it's like a Hitchcock, Bernard Herrmann score.
Very old school.
Extremely. Very traditional orchestra. These lush harmonies that are almost jazzy. It blew me away. I was like, I can't believe this is Johnny Greenwood. Like,
you sound like the people that says, Austin, he did Aliens. What the hell?
I know. Well, I totally get it. I just today, a director friend of mine sent over a scene from a short film he's making. He wants me to help on. And there's an actress in it who's like known in one of the Star Trek shows, and she plays a really like active, energetic character. And in this film he sent me, she's like quiet and very like heavy and sort of heartbroken the whole time. And I wrote to him and I said, it's so cool to see a totally different side of her acting from what the world has been looking at for the last several years on Star Trek. And like, because it's easy to forget, no matter how many times and you've witnessed it, and as an artist you do it, it's still so easy to fall into that trap of like, oh, that's what they do. And in fairness, and again, taking it back to the actual question of like the medium defining the artist, there actually are artists that go, like, I've seen composers that go, I write piano music. I write meditative piano music. That's what I do. Uh-huh. And so it's like they've drawn a very tiny circle that they want to live inside of. Whereas I'm the hard opposite. It's like I want to explore everything that has ever existed in all of music at some point or another, because it's just all amazing, right? And the same with you. Like, I mean, even just this may or may not end up on YouTube, so there may not be a visual reference for future listeners of this, but like in the frame right now in your work, I see your palette that has your paint, your actual paint on it, and because you have been, in recent history working in oils. I see the Light in the Void poster, which is a combination of oil paint that is then photographed to digitize and that you then take into Photoshop. I see the Monkey Island, Melee Island was acrylic, right? It wasn't oil?
Yes, that was acrylic.
Okay, yeah. So that's acrylic. And then there's the purely digital art.
Yes.
And then there's even these pillows that you made. So it's like sewing machines and painting on fabric and choosing fabrics, and never mind the cosplay and the fact that you've also done sculpting and all these other photography, blah blah blah. Like the idea of some artists are explorers and some want to drill really hard into one thing, and that's good for them.
I was one of those.
Well, how did you get over it? I was one
of those. Well, it's still not over. I had it before because I remember the moment I was trying to get into oil painting. The oil painting is just, it's so intimidating. It's like the pro tool, everybody like...
It feels like oil painting is held up on a pillar. Like it is given this sort of like privileged status. Like that's the...
It's because of the old masters. The best pieces normally are, so that's what we know. That's what like the common knowledge that it's what we know. So it is intimidating, but also difficult. it's a little. It takes a while to get used to it, but also now that I think I dominated pretty well. Now that I'm in there. What?
No, that's so funny. That's such a funny. That's like I've basically conquered oil painting as an art form.
Well, yes, it's been a long journey, but I think it's pretty well said.
Yeah, I think you don't feel intimidated by it the way you did.
No, but now I have that fear. If you put in front of me a palette with watercolors, that's another story. I will feel exactly the same. I will feel so much fear because you have to be so careful and so controlling with that. That's another world that I would like to explore at some point, but I know that because I'm a messy painter, I will probably
because you're an amazing painter. Is that what you said?
No, I'm messy.
Oh, messy painter.
But thank you.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. Wow, that's an unusually confident.
No, I'm a messy painter, and I know that watercolors require so much care. I'm not there yet.
Well, I think that there's an analogy in this idea of oil is intimidating, and you better know what you're doing because this is the history of all the great masters that you're stepping into, and you better be willing to, you better be able to kind of hold your territory against the greats of all history. I think that opera is the equivalent of that for at least for classical composers.
I think you're just describing John Williams. I think he holds the classical world so high that he's so like doesn't feel like he belongs there, but he wants to belong.
100%. Absolutely, yeah. I just the other night when John Mauceri was in town for this book event of his new book, The War on Music, which I really loved. And I saw a friend of mine there, and we have a friend in common who has told us both the same story of John Williams speaking to a group of classical composers at the Tanglewood Festival in Boston, which began in part by Leonard Bernstein a long time ago. And there's this composer that has only ever, he's not alive anymore, but he only ever worked in classical music, very spectacular pianist also named Lucas Foss. And Lucas was doing like a master class where he's interviewing John Williams in front of a bunch of young students. And everyone in the room was super excited, and they're all, very probably there to learn how to write symphonies and operas and string quartets and be like modern classical composers, but with an interest in films scoring as well, because that's like a career path as well. And the younger composers see everything as available. They don't think, I have to pick a side. The way John Williams' generation, as soon as he achieved success in film, the classical music community was like, your door is closed to you now. And even at age 90, as the most successful composer imaginable, he still has this weird self-consciousness, like you just described, like he's not good enough for the real masters.
Is there a something that happened he knew that happened?
Well,
you know what I mean?
I think the fact that for the longest time, a lot of orchestras refused to play his music. They would only play like Star Wars, kicking and screaming because they knew it would sell tickets, but they didn't respect it.
Right.
As orchestras, when you conduct an orchestra and they don't like you, you can feel it very much. And so I'm sure he has stood in front of many orchestras over the years and felt their total despise of him. And I mean, look, he just recently, like a year and a half ago or something, conducted the Vienna Philharmonic, one of the most famous and historic orchestras on the planet Earth. He conducted them for the first time in his life, like a year ago. Wow. He was never invited to perform there. They were famously just like, we are a classical orchestra.
Wow.
And I don't know the circumstances. I don't know the inside story about what changed or whatever, and or maybe he wasn't interested for all I know. But it wouldn't surprise me. German and Austrian, very, very traditional. That's where classical music was born, basically. So In any case, he had that self-consciousness, and I remember in the story, Lucas Foss interviewing him, and basically John Williams kept apologizing and kept saying,
Wow.
I know that what I do is very silly, and you're like a real composer.
Whoa, what the
And Lucas basically was like, will you just shut the fuck up? Like, everyone here respects you. Like, everyone here.
Yeah, I know.
And also, don't think for a minute that all these so-called classical composers, every one of them wishes they could write film score. None of them can write music fast enough. Like, you have to have a certain skill and speed to be able to keep up with the deadline of a film. And a lot of the classical composers, Stravinsky famously was asked, I think, by Walt Disney if he would write an original film score. And Stravinsky said, I need 1 year. And they were like, yeah, not happening. Even if you're the great Stravinsky. So anyway, all right, we'll end it with one, another thing that will be a recurring segment that I absolutely love is the idea of, pet peeves and delights. And so I volunteered to go first, where it's one or the other. And it's actually amazing how well it ties to what we've just been talking about, which was not on purpose. Because as soon as we talked about it, I thought, well, I'll just write down some things that feel like pet peeves of mine.
Yeah.
And it actually is 100% on brand of this.
Yeah, it should be natural.
Yeah, well, sometimes they're probably not going to be related, and it's just going to be like, here's a thing that's on my mind. But in this case, it actually is exactly on point, because I think one of my pet peeves, and I can recognize that this might be a flaw in my personality, and maybe I'm being snap judgmental of others. But when I meet artists, whether you're talking about a composer or a painter or any kind of artist, who don't seem curious, it drives me crazy. Because to me, it feels like, how can you be an artist? Mm-hmm. How can you call yourself an artist?
Makes sense.
If you don't want to know what's over that hill, if you don't want to, like, one of the things that I noticed about you that I always loved, when I first met you, like, if we're walking through a clothing store and there's like a fabric of a fur coat or something, you need to touch it, and like, you need to know how it feels. And like, you see a sea anemone under the water, and you like want to know what it feels like, and you're very curious. Well, it's not just you're curious about art, you're curious about the world.
Yes, I'm a very sensorial person. I'm like a dog that needs to smell all around, because that's how I get to know things around me. So I need to touch.
To me, that's interwoven with why you do well as an artist. You try new things, and artists that refuse to experiment or refuse to think outside their box or outside their formula, it drives me crazy. Young composers show me their work all the time, and so often my feedback is the same, where I go, what risk did you take in making this piece? Mm-hmm. Can you name anything that you didn't feel was it? And look, I get it. When I was 12 years old and I was writing music, I was basically just ripping off music because I was trying to learn the basics. But at some point, that's not really acceptable anymore. And you're like, okay, training is over, or at least the fundamentals of training is over. We're all students for our whole life. So I don't mean to suggest now I'm done learning. Not quite the opposite. Right. The more you get, the more you realize you have to learn. But those that don't even try, they don't even like, I hear pieces that are so formulaic, and I go, you risked nothing. I don't understand how that was satisfying to you. So that's my little pet peeve. I love that you
say that, but you don't know what they passed through to create that piece. Maybe for them it was like the big big jump.
That is a very fair. That's actually a great kind of challenge to what I say, because you're right. Maybe all their life they wrote piano solo, delicate music, and then they're like, I want to write a piece that sounds like a movie trailer, and for them that constituted a huge risk. I completely take that point. I would still say, if you listen to all the other movie trailers, you haven't done anything different from them. But I can recognize that you maybe pushed yourself into new and uncomfortable territory, and I guess I should hope that you would keep going and find the thing that makes your movie trailer different from all the 10,000 other generic ones. But that's I'm thrilled that you saw because I overlooked the idea that for them this was a huge leap. Maybe that's a great,
yes, or perhaps not. Perhaps they just wanted to play it safe, but you never know.
I love it. Well, Awesome. Let's call it there.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's our first brushes and keys, and we'll keep making more, and we hope you liked it.
Yes. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.
There. Perfect. That was cute.